Private equity is simply about investing in companies that are not listed on the stock market. When you buy a stock, you're buying a tiny piece of a public company that trades every day. With private equity, investors buy large stakes. Sometimes they buy the entire company, but those companies stay private. There is no ticker symbol, no daily price, and no easy way to sell. The goal is not to trade in and out, it is to buy a business, change it in some meaningful way, and then sell it later for more than it was bought for. A helpful way to think about private equity is a very simple loop. First, buy a company that already exists. Second, improve it. That might mean fixing problems, cutting costs, expanding into new markets, or changing how it operates. Third, sell it to another buyer or take it public again. That buy, improve, and sell loop is the heart of private equity. Almost every strategy fits somewhere inside it. This is where confusion usually starts, because private equity sits between venture capital and hedge funds in how it invests. Venture capital invests in very early stage startups that may not even be profitable yet, like a new tech app or a biotech idea. Hedge funds are different. They mostly trade public assets like stocks, bonds, and currencies. They are not trying to run companies. Private equity sits in the middle. It focuses on established businesses with real employees and real cash flow that are private, not publicly traded. To make this more concrete, imagine a profitable, family-owned manufacturing company, a regional healthcare provider, or a logistics business that has been around for decades. These companies are too big for a typical individual investor, but too small or too private to be listed on the stock market. Private equity firms specialize in buying businesses like these. They step in as owners and try to make them more valuable over time. Once you see private equity as ownership and transformation rather than trading or speculation, the rest of the system starts to make a lot more sense, because the next question becomes how these firms actually afford to buy such large companies in the first place. To buy entire companies, private equity firms need far more money than most investors could ever provide on their own. And this is where the deal structure matters. When a private equity firm wants to acquire a company, the money usually comes from three sources. The first is capital from investors, often large institutions like pension funds, endowments, and wealthy individuals. The second is a smaller amount of money from the private equity firm itself. The third, and often the largest portion, is borrowed money. This is called a leveraged buyout, or LBO. Leverage simply means using debt to amplify the size of the purchase. A simple way to picture this is buying a house with a mortgage. You put down a relatively small amount of your own money, you borrow the rest from the bank, and you rely on the house itself to secure that loan. In private equity, the idea is similar, except instead of a house, it's a business being used as collateral. Here is the crucial detail that many explanations gloss over. The debt is usually placed on the company being bought, not on the private equity firm itself. That means the company's cash flow is used to pay interest and repay loans. If the business performs well, leverage magnifies returns for investors. If the business struggles, that same debt can quickly become a problem. Private equity firms use leverage because it can dramatically boost returns without requiring them to invest as much of their own capital upfront. But leverage is not just a tool for higher profits. It is also the main source of risk in the system. When interest rates are low and cash flows are stable, leverage looks smart. When rates rise or revenue falls, the math can break very quickly. This is also why timing matters so much in private equity. Deals done in low-rate environments behave very differently from deals done when borrowing costs are high. Many older explanations treat leverage as a neutral feature, but in reality, it is the engine that drives both the biggest successes and the most painful failures. And to understand why private equity firms are willing to take that risk, we need to look closely at who is making the decisions and how the incentives are set up. At the center of every private equity deal are two groups of people with very different roles and very different incentives. These are called the general partners and the limited partners, usually shortened to GPS and LPS. Understanding this relationship explains more about private equity than almost anything else. The general partners are the private equity firm itself. They find deals, they negotiate purchases, they decide how much debt to use, they hire and fire management teams, and they choose when to sell. They are the decision makers. Limited partners are the investors who supply most of the money. This includes pension funds, university endowments, insurance companies, and wealthy individuals. Limited partners provide capital, but they do not control decisions. Once they commit their money, they are largely along for the ride. The way GPs get paid is often described as 2 and 20. 2% is a management fee. It is usually charged every year on committed or invested capital. 20% is a share of the profits if the fund performs well. This structure is often presented as perfectly aligned, but in reality, the incentives are more complicated. Management fees mean the firm earns steady income, even if investments struggle. The performance fee rewards upside far more than it punishes downside. For limited partners, the experience feels very different. They commit capital upfront, but their money is called gradually, over several years. They have little control over timing, strategy, or exits. If a deal goes well, they benefit. If it goes badly, they absorb most of the loss. This imbalance does not mean the system is broken, but it does mean the risks and rewards are not shared equally. This incentive structure explains why private equity firms are willing to use significant leverage and why they pursue aggressive strategies. At this point, you might be wondering something important. If limited partners commit capital upfront and absorb most of the risk, why do they still choose to invest? We'll answer that later. Once you see private equity through the lens of incentives rather than morality, many of its behaviors start to make sense, including what happens after a firm takes control of a company. Once a private equity firm takes control of a company, the focus shifts from buying to transforming. This is the stage people argue about the most, because this is where real lives, jobs, and communities are affected. What actually happens depends far more on the strategy and financial health of the company, not on slogans about private equity being good or bad. In many cases, the first changes happen at the management level. Private equity firms often replace or supplement the existing leadership team, especially if they believe the company has been poorly run or lacks experience at a larger scale. From there, they typically look at costs, operations, and cash flow in much greater detail than before. This can mean renegotiating supplier contracts, shutting down unprofitable divisions, selling non-core assets, or standardizing processes across multiple locations. Sometimes, these changes genuinely improve a business. Companies become more efficient, better managed, and more competitive. In other cases, the improvements are largely financial rather than operational. Assets may be sold to generate cash, headcount may be reduced to boost margins, and short-term performance may be prioritized over long-term resilience. Both outcomes exist, and pretending otherwise is where many explanations lose credibility. A key point often missed is that public companies face constant pressure from stock markets, while private equity-owned companies operate behind closed doors. This can be an advantage. It allows difficult changes to happen without daily market panic, but it can also be a risk, because decisions are made with far less public scrutiny. Whether this leads to better results or worse ones depends on how responsibly the owners use that flexibility. These operational choices matter, because they determine whether a company can comfortably service its debt. When the business performs well, private equity ownership may barely be noticed by customers or employees. When performance weakens, the consequences show up fast, and this is where conversations quickly turn to failure and bankruptcy. When people talk about private equity with anger, they are usually talking about bankruptcy, because this is where the gap between perception and reality is the largest. Bankruptcy in private equity is often portrayed as a deliberate strategy, but in practice, it is usually the result of leverage colliding with weaker than expected business performance. When a company owned by a private equity firm struggles, the first pressure point is debt. Interest payments still need to be made, lenders still expect repayment, and if cash flow drops too far, the company can no longer keep up. At that point, bankruptcy is not about shutting everything down overnight. In many cases, it is a legal restructuring process, one designed to keep the business operating while debts are renegotiated. Who loses when this happens is an uncomfortable question, but it is an important one. Employees often feel the impact first, through layoffs, benefit cuts, or store closures. Suppliers may not get paid in full. Equity holders, including the private equity fund, can lose their entire investment in that company. Lenders may recover part of their loans, depending on how the debt was structured. This is not a victimless outcome, and it is why these cases generate so much public backlash. What confuses people is that the private equity firm itself usually survives, even if a portfolio company fails. That is because the firm does not carry the company's debt on its own balance sheet. The risk is contained within each deal. This structure protects the firm, but it concentrates risk at the company level, which is exactly why leverage can be so dangerous. At the same time, it is misleading to say that private equity firms automatically profit from bankruptcy. In many failures, the firm loses money, reputation, and future fundraising power. Bankruptcy is not the goal. It is a downside scenario when aggressive assumptions do not play out. Understanding this distinction helps explain why private equity keeps operating this way and why the criticism persists. because the losses are real and they are unevenly felt. With all of that complexity and risk, the natural question becomes why investors continue to put money into private equity funds at all and whether it actually works for them in practice. To understand why investors still commit money to private equity, you have to look at what investing in a private equity fund actually feels like in real life, because it is very different from buying a stock or an index fund. When an investor commits to a private equity fund, they do not hand over all their money on day one. Instead, they make a capital commitment, which is a promise to provide money over time when the fund asks for it. Those requests are called capital calls, and they can arrive unpredictably over several years. This means your money may sit idle for long periods, earning nothing before it is finally invested. Early on, returns often look negative due to fees and startup costs. This pattern is known as the J curve. It is normal in private equity, but it can be unsettling, especially for first-time investors who are used to seeing daily account balances move. Liquidity is another major difference. Once money is committed, it is usually locked up for 10 to 15 years. There is no easy sell button. Secondary markets do exist, but selling early often means accepting a steep discount. This is why private equity works best for investors who truly do not need access to that capital for a long time. Performance is also more nuanced than headlines suggest. Some top-tier private equity funds have delivered exceptional results, especially for large institutions with access to the best managers, but outcomes vary widely. Average funds often do not outperform public markets after fees, and returns are heavily skewed toward a small group of winners. This is why phrases like private equity always beats the market are misleading. What matters is which fund, which vintage, and under what conditions. For certain investors, particularly pensions, endowments, and families with long time horizons, private equity can make sense as part of a broader portfolio. For others, especially smaller accredited investors or those who value flexibility, the structure can be frustrating and disappointing. Many people drawn to private equity by the idea of high returns eventually realize that what they are really interested in is exposure to private markets in a more transparent or flexible way rather than traditional buyout funds. And that realization brings us to the most practical question of all: how this entire system actually affects you, whether you are an employee, an investor, or simply someone trying to understand where their money and their economy are heading. So what all of this actually means for you depends on where you sit in the system. If you work at a company that gets acquired by a private equity firm, it does not automatically mean disaster, but it does mean change. Management will be under pressure to improve performance quickly. Decisions will be driven by cash flow, and stability will often matter more than long-term vision. For employees, the most important thing is understanding whether the business is healthy enough to carry debt, because strong operations tend to survive private equity ownership far better than weak ones. If you are a retail investor, private equity is mostly something you are exposed to indirectly. Your retirement account, pension, or insurance provider may allocate to private equity without you ever choosing it. That does not make private equity good or bad for you personally, but it does mean it is worth understanding where risk and leverage exist in the system. For most individuals, liquid public investments still do the heavy lifting, simply because they offer transparency, flexibility, and control. If you are an accredited investor, private equity can be tempting, but it requires discipline and realism. Access alone does not guarantee good outcomes. Manager selection matters more than strategy labels, and patience matters more than headline returns. Many investors ultimately decide that they prefer exposure to private markets and structures that better match their own liquidity needs and risk tolerance, rather than committing to a single, long, opaque fund. When you zoom out, private equity is neither a hero nor a villain. It is a financial tool, and like any powerful tool, it amplifies incentives. In the right conditions, with responsible execution, it can help businesses grow, professionalize, and survive. In the wrong conditions, especially when leverage is pushed too far, it can hollow companies out and leave real damage behind. The difference is rarely about intent, and almost always about structure, timing, and risk. The reason private equity feels so mysterious is not because it is unknowable, but because it operates away from public view. Once you understand how the money flows, who makes the decisions, and who absorbs the risk, the system stops feeling scary, and it starts feeling legible. That clarity is what allows you to respond thoughtfully instead of emotionally. Whether you're an employee, an investor, or simply someone trying to understand how modern capitalism actually works.